So today we're looking at loops. They are just as important and as useful in Flutterflow as any other programming environment, whether it's code or no code. And basically what we do, we iterate over a set of information until a condition is met. That may be a number matches or doesn't match, or a condition becomes true or false or whatever. And for our purposes, we go to the action flow editor, and to add a loop, when you've got no actions, it's one of the options there. So you simply add a loop. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over one I've already got set up. So we'll walk through that process and have a look how we set up a loop, how we break a loop, and what we can use them for. Basically, this is our menu ordering app. If you watch any of the videos, you've probably seen it a few times by now. So what we've got is a component, which is a counter. And what we need to do is execute a loop to understand how many of that particular item that our user wants to add onto their menu. So therefore, let's assume it's a pizza and you want 5 lots of mushrooms for argument's sake, though why would you, but there you go. We need to execute a loop, so we put 5 sets of mushrooms in the basket when we add to click the add to basket button. So we click up and down on the counter to get the value, and then we put it in the basket by clicking the basket option, and that's where we run the loop. So if I just go into test mode, and there we've got our options. So in this instance, basically, we obviously, because it being a menu, we're not allowing the counter to go below 0 because we don't want to have any minus numbers for these things. But if you want loads of guacamole or loads of cheese, whatever, what we need to do when we click on the add to basket button, we need to execute a loop to iterate over it enough times to add the right correct amount into the basket. This is where I've tackled the problem. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it, but it's a good example to show how to use a loop in this scenario. So we've got a couple of page states here that are relevant for this. We have got loop count and count local. The loop count we'll get to when we look at the action. The count local is basically the value of the counter, and that is the amount of times we need to iterate over the loop to keep adding them to the basket for the correct amount of times. Now that value is coming from a callback on the counter. So if we go to the counter, and this is what this is down here. Now I've done a separate video on the how to get doing the callback on the counter, because I think it's a good one just for demonstrating getting values out of component state variables. So I've done that, and that'll be on the screen somewhere for you to go and check out so you can access that information. So if we go back to the page states, and then we say we've got the loop count. So what will happen is the loop count will increment each time once until it reaches the same value as the component value, and then it will stop iterating. So basically what we're doing in our action, we've got the loop down here. Because we've got the dynamic children, every time we go through a loop, the page state changes, obviously. So what we're doing, the first thing on our action flow editor, we're actually just resetting the value of the loop count. So the first thing we do when we tap on our add to basket button is resetting the loop count, because they're dynamically generated and we're using the loop count on every one. We need to reset it every time we click the add to basket button, otherwise it just obviously doesn't work. And what we're doing, we're resetting the value back to its default, which is 1. So if we go back to the page states, the initial field value is 1. So every time you click on the add to basket, the loop will automatically reset itself back to 1. This is just where we are checking if somebody's already added the main meal to their order before they start customizing it. So that's not relevant to the loop. So what we come down here, so what we're saying is the count local. So if basically the count local, if you remember, is the value of the component. So if it's 0, i.e. they don't want that option, i.e. they've removed it, we're doing something here, and that's just removing it from the menu. But what we're doing here, this is our loop. So now what happens is you have to be careful with loops, because if you don't break it, some have a way to break it, it will just run forever and it will break your app. So you can put loop breaks in, So you can have, for instance, add a loop break. So basically, once a certain condition has been met, you can say, okay, I'm finished, don't want to do it anymore, and you add a loop break. In our scenario here, we don't need to do that because we need to go over the loop until it's completed because we need to add them all in. So what we're saying is, if loop count is less than or equal to count local, continue the loop, basically. So what will happen is our loop count, remember, starts on 1, and we are in here, see, the last thing we do in the loop is we increment the loop count by 1 each time. So what happen is loop count less than count local, which is the value of the component, if you remember. So yes, it's less than, we do a thing, and then we increment the loop count by 1, and then we start the loop again. And then is the loop count less than or equal to count local, i.e. the component value? Yes, it's still less, or yes, it's equal. We do a thing, and we go and increment it again, and start the loop again. Is loop count equal to or less than the component value? No, because we've incremented it 1 past the component value. So therefore the loop will stop. It won't do anything else. And then we'll just show a snack bar when the loop stops to say your item's been added to the order. Now, like I say, you can, if you want to just go through this and iterate over a set of data until you reach a certain point, and then you will need to add you will need to add a loop break. Obviously, we're not doing that, but it just brings to bear in mind when you're iterating over this, if your value becomes true, but you got no way of ending the loop, you do have to add a loop break. So that's something to bear in mind. So that's how it works. Essentially what we're doing, you need 2 values. You need the value you need to get to, and then you need a value you're incrementing. So in this instance, we're creating the value we want to get to in the component, the counter component, which goes up and down, and the loop count variable we are incremented by 1 each time we go over the loop. So they're the 2 bits of information you need to run a loop. And then in this instance, we're just adding basically something to an order. That's what we're doing here. But obviously you can do anything in between. The important thing is you are starting a loop and you are incrementing your loop count value by 1 each time, and it needs an endpoint. And if it doesn't have an endpoint, it needs a loop break when you need it to break, i.e. when something becomes true, i.e. the bit of information you're looping over to try and find once it becomes true, add a loop break. If not, keep trying. So that may be like going over a database table to get some information, possibly. Although I wouldn't do it in this, I'd do that in Superbase anyway. But it's just just an example of when you need to do a loop break. Okay, so that being said, let's try this out. So if we go into test mode, so we need to test this out. So if we just add our main to the order, and then basically if we just up guacamole to 3, cheese to 3, and then we add both of those to the basket, what's happening is we've iterated over the loop 3 times, and then our count local variable is this value, and then our loop count is incrementing by 1 until it gets to 4, and when it gets to 4 it breaks a loop because this condition then becomes false, i.e. our loop count is greater than count local. And likewise here, we've iterated over the loop 3 times, and then when we get to 4 it breaks the loop, and we've added those to the basket. So if we go to the basket, we've got our 3 lots of guacamole and our 3 lots of cheese. So that's how I'm using loops in this instance. I mean, there's endless ways you can use loops. This is dead easy, obviously, but that's why I'm using it in this instance. So that's how they work. They're pretty powerful and probably essential depending on your application. So hopefully that helps. If it does, please consider the usual like and subscribe, and I will speak to you in the next video.